They say the old bell was melted down after the fire, buried under stone and prayer. But no one can explain why it still rings. No rope pulls it. No hands reach for it. And every time it tolls, a child vanishes quietly, without struggle, as if they walked into the sound and never returned. In the town of Gracemire, the fog comes fast, the names vanish quicker, and the only thing louder than the silence is the bell that no one built ringing once, then gone. Until the next name is called. It rang just after sundown, once clear, low, and cruel. The kind of sound that makes dogs yelp and birds take off too fast, wings flapping against the dusk like sheets in a storm. No one moved at first. Folks just paused, forks frozen midair, knitting needles stalled, boots halting on dirt paths, as if each was waiting for someone else to admit they'd heard it. The bell hadn't sounded in over 2 decades, not since the fire took the steeple and most of the children in the chapel's care. But there it was, one long toll that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, humming through the ground like something waking up. By morning, Elias Clay was gone. His shoes were still lined up by the door, polished like his mother always kept them, and the glass of water he left on the table was undisturbed. There was no scream, no broken window, no prints in the soft mud outside, just his bed, neatly made, his quilt, folded twice, his name, whispered once and never again. The town moved as if underwater that morning. Mothers clutched their children tighter, eyes darting toward corners and shadows and schoolhouses. Men walked faster, past the ruins of the old chapel, but not one dared speak aloud what they all knew, that the bell meant a child had been taken. And Elias would not be the last. Clara May stood on her porch, watching the fog coil around the sycamores, her own daughter tucked behind her skirt. She had heard it before the others, hours before it rang. It came to her in the early dark, before the rooster, before the crows, a sharp sound, not quite in her ears, but behind her eyes. And when she rose, heart pounding, she knew exactly what it meant. She'd felt it when she was a child, too felt it the day her cousin slipped from the world without a trace, just after the same sound knelled through the holler. But no one had believed her then, and no one would believe her now. Still, she watched the horizon, like it might answer. Watched as the town grew quieter than grief. Watched as someone drew a chalk X above the Clay family's door before the sun fully rose. And when her daughter asked what that meant, Clara did not answer. She just closed the door and whispered a prayer to something that had stopped listening a long time ago. Clara May had heard the bell before anyone else, long before its sound shattered the evening calm. It didn't come through her ears at first. It came through the walls, through the floorboards beneath her bed, through the marrow of her bones. It rang inside her like a memory she never asked to keep. She had been darning socks by candlelight, her daughter June humming soft to herself in the corner when the air changed. The flame flickered sideways, not from a breeze, but as if something had breathed inward. The silence that followed was not empty, it was pregnant, tight, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound, not loud, not metallic, a single low tone that seemed to rise from underneath her feet, not above. Clara's fingers froze mid-stitch, the red thread pulled taut across her lap. June didn't react at all. She kept humming, the tune shifting into something darker, unfamiliar. "Did you hear that, baby?" Clara asked, but her voice barely left her throat. June looked up slowly, her eyes wide but unfocused, as if still dreaming. "I don't want to draw the bell again," she whispered. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring out the small window toward the smudge of trees where the church used to be. She couldn't see it through the fog, but she could feel it like a pulse in the dirt. She remembered a night just like this, almost 23 years ago, when her cousin Ruthie disappeared. They were both 9 then, playing by the edge of the pines, when Ruthie turned to Clara and said, "I hear it." A second later, she was gone. No scream, no rustling, just gone. Clara had told the adults what happened. No one listened. The church burned a month later, and the bell iron, rusted, too large to move, was said to have cracked straight through. It was buried. There was even a sermon. But no one touched the sound. It lingered, it waited, and now it was waking again. Morning came slow and gray. The news spread without voices. Faces alone carried the weight. Elias Clay, 11 years old, loved to whittle birds from pine bark, was gone, vanished like a puff of breath in winter. His mother left the porch light burning long after the sun rose. His father stood in the doorway, unmoving. No one knocked, no one needed to. Everyone already knew. That afternoon, Clara went to check the old pine chest in the attic, the one her mother had warned her never to open unless the bell returned. She pulled the lid slowly. Inside, folded in linen, lay a tiny collar sewn with red thread, and a child's drawing in charcoal on brittle paper. A bell floating above a grave, and next to it, a small figure with no face, holding hands with a little girl who looked exactly like June. The Clays didn't scream, didn't weep on the porch, or shake their fists at the sky like some folks had done when others vanished. They just went quiet. Elias's mother, Dinah, swept the porch 3 times that morning and left his shoes right where they were pointed neat toward the door, laces still double knotted. She laid his jacket across the railing and smoothed the shoulders like she expected him home any minute. His father, Samuel, stayed inside. Some said he hadn't moved from the kitchen table since sunrise. The window beside him was open, as if he was listening for something only he could hear. No one spoke to them. Not because they were feared or hated, but because in Gracemire, you don't ask questions when a child disappears. You bring bread. You leave flowers. You keep your voice low and your children closer. By midday, a white chalk X had appeared above their doorframe. No one admitted to drawing it. No one ever did. But there it was, thick, uneven, already starting to run from the moisture in the air. It wasn't just the Clay's house. Years ago, it had happened the same way. A child gone, a door marked, a silence spreading like spilled ink across the town. Clara May watched from her garden as Mrs. Tillman hurried her twin boys inside. The dog that always barked at strangers now sat with its tail tucked under, whining at nothing. Even the wind seemed to avoid the street where Elias once ran, where his laugh used to chase summer fireflies past curfew. That laugh was gone now, pulled into the same hush that had taken so many before. At supper, Clara couldn't bring herself to cook. June sat at the table, her hands folded too neatly, eyes too wide. "Why did they mark the door?" she asked softly. Clara opened her mouth to lie, but the words stuck. She thought of her own childhood house, how her mother had made her scrub the chalk X clean when Ruthie vanished. "To remember," she said finally. June blinked. "Remember who?" Clara didn't answer. That night, she dreamt of bells. Not the church bell, but smaller ones, hidden in the trees, buried in pockets, stitched into collars and cuffs. They rang not to summon, but to warn. In the dream, Elias stood at the edge of a pond, barefoot, holding a string with nothing tied to the end. "It's not done yet," he said, eyes hollow. "It won't be done until she sings." Clara woke with the sound still ringing in her ears, and for a moment she couldn't tell if it had been real or not, until she noticed the window was open, and on the sill rested a small object, smooth, round, and cold, a bell's clapper. No bell, just the mouth of a sound waiting to come back. They kept the old books locked in a glass cabinet at the back of the schoolhouse, behind a curtain no one touched, and a layer of dust thick enough to write in. Most of them were hymnals, farming almanacs, and moldy arithmetic primers. But behind those, stacked crooked and bound in frayed ribbon, were the town ledgers, births, deaths, marriages, and a record of those who simply stopped being. Clara found them one evening after June came home with charcoal on her fingers and drawings of bells in her pocket again. She waited until the teacher left, said she was cleaning up, and slipped behind the curtain. The air back there was colder, somehow, and smelled faintly of burnt paper and old beeswax. She opened the first ledger with care. The ink was faded but legible, the script tight and elegant. Years rolled past as she turned the pages, names she knew, names she had only heard in whispers, and then a pattern. Children. Only children. Each entry written with eerie precision. Elias Clay, age 11, presumed drowned, body not recovered. A few pages before that, Miriam Rhodes, age 9, vanished during Sunday service. Shoes found beneath pew. Another, Thomas Griggs, age 10, last seen near Bell Tower ruins, declared lost. They weren't listed in the usual sections. They had a section of their own, marked by a thin line of red ink. Above that line, a phrase written in Latin that Clara couldn't translate, but the words made her stomach twist. There were 33 names, all of them children, all of them vanished, all before the year the church burned. No mention of the bell, no mention of what tied them together. But Clara felt it, the same way she felt the sound in her bones. This ledger wasn't meant to be kept, it was meant to be buried. She flipped to the final page and found something wedged between the sheets, a torn corner of parchment, softer than the others, folded twice. She opened it slowly. It was a drawing, done by hand, shaky and uneven. It showed a bell without a tower, suspended mid-air above a field of crosses, and beneath it, in crude script, she tolls them home. Clara's breath caught. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned fast, but the room was empty. Only the wind outside, brushing the glass, and the faint sound of something distant metal, hollow and slow rising through the floorboards like a breath. She slammed the book shut, tucked the parchment in her coat, and left without locking the cabinet again. Outside, the sky was the color of bruised fruit, and June was already waiting for her in the street, barefoot, holding something behind her back. "Mama," she said, smiling too wide, "I found another one." She opened her hand. A child's tooth, still warm, and from the woods behind them, the bell rang once more. No one built the bell tower. That's what the oldest folks in Gracemire always said, usually with a glass in hand and a gaze fixed anywhere but the hill where its remains still leaned. They'd say it was already standing when the first settlers arrived, moss on the stones and rust along the iron, as if it had grown from the earth instead of being forged by human hands. The church had been built around it later, like a barn raised around a root. But it was the bell that came first, and the widow, too. Children spoke of her in whispers. The woman in black seen only when the fog was thick enough to bite through. She stood at the foot of the ruined tower, veil hiding her face, hands folded like she was waiting for a hymn to begin. Some swore she was just a shadow or a trick of the light. Others said they saw her humming, though they never heard the sound, only felt it low and strange, curling through their teeth. Clara had seen her once, as a girl. It was the week Ruthie disappeared. The widow had stood in the ash of the burned church, unmoving, as if the fire had spared only her shape. Clara never told anyone, not even her mother, and now, nearly 3 decades later, she saw her again. Just before dawn, as the mist rolled off the hills, Clara stepped onto the porch, and there she was, near the crooked steeple, shrouded in fog, hands clasped beneath her waist, like a mourner at an invisible grave. Her head tilted once, as if acknowledging Clara from a distance, and then she vanished into the stone. Not walked away, vanished. June was still asleep, her breath shallow and strange. She had started murmuring in her sleep again, half names, half prayers. Clara tried to wake her gently, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers, but June's eyes opened before she touched her, already wide, already knowing. She was singing, June whispered, voice dry. Not words, just sound, but I think she was trying to remember something. Who was? Clara asked, though she already knew. The widow. She stands where the bell used to hang. Later that day, Clara went to the tower. She shouldn't have, but her feet carried her up the hill before her mind could catch up. The structure was mostly bones now, stone eaten through with ivy, old wood blackened from the fire. But the arch where the bell once swung was still intact. And underneath it, etched into the stone, like someone had carved it with their fingernails, was a phrase. She tolls them home. The same words from the ledger page. Beneath the carving lay something small and pale in the grass. A row of tiny red stitches, like the hem of a child's collar, and wrapped inside, a curl of blonde hair tied in a knot. From the trees behind her came a hum, soft and low, like breath through metal. Clara did not turn around. She came back on the third day, barefoot and blinking, like someone who'd forgotten how to use her eyes. Her name was Lottie Kemp, the last child taken before the fire, and for 23 years her name had been whispered like a bruise. Folks said she vanished during choir practice, one moment singing high and clear, the next gone. No scream, no door opened. Just the bell ringing once, and Lottie erased like chalk in the rain. They buried a quilt in her name, since there was no body. Her mother stitched Lottie in red thread along the hem, and went quiet until her own death, 2 winters later. But now, here she was again, unchanged, as if not a single day had passed. Her dress still fit her, her braids were tight, and her eyes were far too old. The farmer who found her standing in the middle of his field didn't recognize her at first, just a silent girl with dirt-streaked cheeks and hands that trembled like wind through reeds. She didn't speak, she didn't blink for minutes at a time. When asked her name, she only pressed her lips together and pointed east toward the ruins of the old church. The townsfolk gathered, some crossing themselves, others backing away like she was a ghost with skin. Clara stood near the edge of the crowd, heart lurching. June held her hand too tight, her other hand stuffed in her pocket around something she refused to show. The sheriff tried to question the girl, but Lottie wouldn't look at him. Wouldn't look at anyone, really, until she turned slowly and met Clara's gaze. For a moment, the world dropped out. There was recognition there, but not of Clara. Lottie was looking through her, past her, as though she were seeing something stitched to Clara's soul that no one else could see. Then Lottie smiled. It was wrong, too wide, too clean. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out something wrapped in old lace. A button, rusted through, a braid of red thread, and a sliver of bone, curved like a question mark. June's hand flinched in Clara's grip. That night, no one rang the church bell, but the sound came anyway, low and dragging. The house shook once, and June sat up in bed, eyes still closed, whispering names that hadn't been spoken in decades. Clara wrote them down, one by one. When morning came, she checked them against the ledger. All but one matched. The last name was new, fresh ink, still wet, even though no pen had touched the page. June's name. Beneath it, a line had been added in a spidery hand. Not taken. Returned. Clara dropped the book. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like breath from a throat too deep to find. And somewhere in the trees, something began to hum. They found the pastor's ledger buried behind the altar stones, wrapped in oilcloth and pressed between two bricks blackened by fire. The boy who discovered it had been chasing a rabbit through the ruins, but when his foot caught on something hard beneath the moss, he stopped still and screamed. By the time Clara arrived, the crowd had already gathered. The boy was shaking, and the book was in the sheriff's hands. No one spoke. The leather was cracked and bubbled from heat, but the pages inside were strangely untouched, too clean, too white, as if fire knew not to touch it. Clara pushed forward, her breath tight, and asked if she could look. The sheriff hesitated, then, without a word, handed it over. The script inside was the pastor's. Neat, measured, written with a steady hand, even when the words broke sense. The early pages were what one might expect, sermons, attendance, baptisms, but the tone shifted fast. One entry read, "They are not ours. We keep them, we feed them, we love them, but they are not ours to hold." Another, "She comes when the soil is too hungry. When the bell rings, it is not a call to worship, it is a hunger howl." Clara turned the page. Her hands began to sweat. The ink bled a little here, words smeared by what looked like water or tears. The offering ritual was never meant to be permanent. We bargained for rain, for crops, for peace, one child per cycle. The bell was the pact. Below that, a list, not names, but numbers, ages, times, Toll counts. 10 tolls for the first, 11 for the second, 12 for the one who came back. Clara swallowed hard. The entries grew more erratic after that. The pastor began writing in fragments. Repetitions. One line scratched again and again across 3 pages. The bell is not iron. The bell is not iron. The bell is not iron. On the last page, a drawing. Crude, done in what looked like ash and blood. A bell, yes, but hanging upside down, like a womb or a trap. And beneath it, children crawling toward the clapper, hands outstretched. One of the children looked like Elias. Another, Clara's stomach twisted, looked like June. She snapped the book shut. The sound echoed louder than it should have. From the trees behind the ruins, a cold wind rose. Something like a whisper slithered through the pine needles, and every crow in the distance lifted at once, a black cloud breaking from bone-colored branches. Clara turned and found June standing in the field, eyes closed, humming, the same tune as before. Lottie stood beside her, holding her hand. No one had seen the girl arrive. And when Clara shouted her name, June turned, but her voice, when it came, was not her own. It was the pastor's. She tolls them home. The drawings began appearing in the woods 2 mornings after the second bell. No one admitted to making them, but they multiplied fast, scrawled in charcoal, mud, and something darker that Clara didn't want to name. Children found them first, then parents followed. Etched into tree bark, smeared onto smooth rocks, traced into the packed red clay near the creek. Always the same shapes, a bell, wide and open like a screaming mouth. A faceless figure standing beside it, arms too long, fingers stretching toward the treetops, and rows of small stick children walking toward it, hands held, eyes black dots. Some of the drawings were simple, childlike. Others had detail. No child should know. Figures with ribs exposed, eyes hollowed, mouths sewn shut with red slashes. One was found carved into the trunk of the oldest oak in Gracemire, and it was fresh sap, still weeping from the grooves. The town held a meeting in the old post office. Chairs scraped, voices rose. The sheriff said it was vandalism, children with too much time and too many stories. But no one believed him, not really. The room reeked of fear. You could smell it in the sweat that soaked collars, in the way hands clenched jawlines, in how no one let their children out of arm's reach. Clara sat in the back, June beside her, drawing circles on her knee with a broken piece of red chalk. Her humming never stopped now. Soft, breathy, just beneath the edge of hearing. Clara had stopped asking her to stop. That night, Clara took a lantern into the woods. She followed the drawings like breadcrumbs, her skirts catching on thorns, heart knocking like a fist on the inside of her ribs. She knew where they were leading her. The air shifted the deeper she went, growing heavier, like walking through syrup and sleep. The silence became too perfect, no frogs, no owls, not even wind. Then, at the base of a split cedar, she found the largest drawing yet, a bell the size of a house, tipped sideways. Beneath it, dozens of children drawn in charcoal and dried blood, bones peeking through scribbled skin, each one marked with a small red X over their chest. Except one. The smallest figure was circled, and it wore June's braid. As Clara stared, the ground beneath her trembled not a shake, but a low pulse. The trees seemed to lean closer. A soft rustling started, but there was no wind. Then she heard it faint, distant, the high ringing of metal on stone, as if something was being dragged underground, the clapper of a bell, searching for its voice. Clara turned and fled, her lantern swinging wildly, throwing shadows that moved the wrong way. When she burst into her home, June was already sitting at the table, still humming, her eyes locked on a new drawing spread out in front of her, but it was of Clara. Standing at the edge of the woods, with the bell hanging above her head, ready to fall. When Clara was a child, every mother in Gracemire sewed red thread into her children's collars. Tiny stitches, looped 3 times at the nape of the neck or behind the heart, never meant to be decorative. They called it confusing the sound. The belief was old, older than the church, older than the town itself. The thread would tangle the ringing, hide the child in the noise, tricked the bell into looking elsewhere. Most had forgotten the practice after the fire. The pastor had declared it superstitious, unnecessary, even blasphemous. But not everyone stopped. Clara remembered the feel of it, itchy against her skin, the way her mother checked it each morning like a prayer. After Ruthie disappeared, she'd sewn 3 rows into Clara's dress, then 5, then more, until her collar was stiff with knots and she could hardly breathe. Now, years later, Clara found herself standing over June's sewing box, fingers trembling, threading a needle in the candlelight. The red thread hadn't been touched in years. It was buried beneath buttons and broken brooches, almost forgotten but not gone. She held June's Sunday dress in her lap and began to stitch, loop after loop, just as her mother had. June sat across from her, watching without blinking. "You think it will stop the bell?" she asked softly. Clara didn't look up. "I think it might confuse it, slow it down, hide you long enough to run." "It doesn't want me to run," June said. "It wants me to listen." The words landed like ice water. Clara forced her needle forward. "Then you don't listen, no matter what you hear." June tilted her head. "Even if it sounds like you?" Clara paused. Her hands clenched around the fabric. June smiled, too calm. The next morning, half the children at school arrived with red thread sewn into their sleeves. No one admitted why. No one needed to. The town remembered all at once. And that afternoon, when another drawing appeared on the schoolhouse wall, a bell bleeding from the mouth, children climbing into it like a cave, no one called it a prank. That evening, the bell rang again. Once, long, low, the sound cracked windows. A dog barked once, then fell silent. At the clay house, Dinah collapsed on the porch, a baby shoe clutched in her hand. At the edge of town, a woman found her child's coat folded neatly on the path, still warm. And at Clara's door, someone knocked 3 times. When she opened it, no one stood there. Only a piece of cloth hung on the handle, stiff with blood. A collar, red thread unraveled from the seams. And stitched into the corner, in a child's uneven hand, was a single word. June, the night Ruth Ann disappeared. The sky had been the same shade of sickly blue, too bright for evening, too dim for day. Clara remembered it, because that was the last time the bell rang 3 times. 1 toll meant a warning, 2 meant a taking, but 3 meant something was coming back. She had heard it only once before, when she was no older than June. Now it was happening again. As the final echo faded, a silence followed so heavy it felt like weight. Trees stopped swaying, crickets hushed. Somewhere down the lane, a mother screamed. Ruth Ann's mother. She'd been dead nearly 15 years, but the voice was hers. Clara didn't go outside. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at June, who was holding something small and wooden in her lap. "It was in my shoe," June whispered. She opened her hand. Inside was a box carved from dark cedar, no bigger than a matchbook. Clara hesitated, then reached out and lifted the lid. Inside were 4 tiny baby teeth, smooth and warm, as if they had just been plucked. Clara shut the box without a word and placed it gently on the windowsill. Outside, fog crept low, hugging the ground like breath crawling on its belly. Clara waited for the second scream. It never came. Instead, someone knocked on the door, 3 times, the same pattern as the last. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the door as if it would explain itself. Then June rose, slow and calm, and walked to the window. "She's waiting," she said. "By the pine. She wants to give it back." "Who, baby?" Clara's voice cracked. "The bell," June said, and smiled like it was a person, like it had a face and hands and a place at the table. Clara bolted the door, drew every curtain, and lit every candle. She pulled the red thread from her own collar and stitched it into June's nightdress, cross after cross, whispering old prayers she barely remembered. That night, she didn't sleep. At exactly 3:27, the bell rang again, but not from the steeple. It came from the ground, as though something was shaking itself awake beneath the town. June sat up in bed. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing. Her mouth opened, and she began to hum deep and low, a sound no child should know. Clara reached out, gripped her shoulders, whispered her name again and again. June blinked, looked up, and said one thing before falling back into sleep. She's done waiting. At sunrise, the townspeople gathered outside the old chapel ruins. Someone had left something on the altar stone. A child's shoe, soaked through. Next to it, wrapped in a torn hymn sheet, were Ruth Ann's teeth, clean, preserved, and arranged in the shape of a bell. June began whispering names in her sleep. It started with one, Elias, and then another, Miriam, then Thomas. Each time she spoke, her voice shifted slightly, like she was borrowing someone else's breath. Clara wrote them down in the dark, one by one. On the back of the old hymn pages, she kept folded under her pillow. There were 11 names by the third night, and every one matched those lost before the fire. But on the fourth night, she said a name no one knew. Caleb. Clara's pen stopped mid-stroke. June whispered it again, softer this time, like a secret being passed from one grave to another. Caleb, she said, he's under the floor. The next morning, Clara didn't wait. She moved the rug in the parlor and pried up the old wooden slats with a rusted crowbar she hadn't touched since Samuel died. The boards groaned like they remembered something. Beneath them, only dirt. At first, then, under the packed earth, her fingers struck something round. She dug fast, with bare hands, until she uncovered a box no bigger than a cradle. It was wrapped in oilcloth and tied with red string, the same kind threaded through June's collar. She untied it with trembling fingers. Inside were children's drawings, dozens of them. All the same image, the bell, upside down, hanging not from a tower, but from the sky itself. Beneath it, children lay in rows. Some had their eyes closed, some had none at all. Tucked at the bottom was a lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon. Clara turned it over. A name was stitched into the ribbon's edge. Caleb. She didn't remember burying it, didn't remember the ribbon, or the box, or the name. But her own handwriting stared back at her, stitched in the same red thread. June watched from the doorway, arms folded in silence. He said you promised, she whispered. Promised what? Clara snapped. To return what you borrowed. Her voice was flat, far too calm for a child. That night, the bell rang again, not from the chapel, not from the earth, from inside the house. It started as a low hum in the walls, a vibration in the glass, then bloomed into a full, rich toll that echoed through every floorboard. June sat upright in bed, eyes blank, mouth moving. The names came faster now. Clara couldn't keep up. 17, then 20, then 23, then silence. At dawn, Clara found a new drawing folded under June's pillow. It wasn't the bell, it was a cradle, and inside it lay a small body, wrapped in linen, eyes sewn shut, written beneath in red, "Return what was taken, or we will." From outside, she heard it again, 3 knocks on the door, not with a hand, but with something hollow, something made to ring. Clara knew the bell had been melted. She remembered the day they poured the iron into the pit behind the chapel, how the heat blistered the air, and the townsfolk stood in silence, as if watching a body burn. The pastor had read a psalm, but no one listened. They buried what remained under layers of stone and salt, then planted dogwoods to forget the shape of what had once called them to prayer. But now the sound had returned, loud and whole, as if it had never been touched by flame. Clara no longer believed the bell had ever been made by human hands. It was something older, something found, the kind of object that doesn't come from a forge, but from the mouth of something sleeping. And it was ringing again, without rope, without tower. The tolls didn't come from above, they came from within. That evening, as the sun turned copper through the trees, Clara walked to the burial pit. The dogwoods had withered, their bark peeled in curling strips, and no birds nested in their branches. She knelt beside the largest stone, brushed the dirt away, and pressed her ear to the ground. The soil vibrated, not like a tremor, but like a breath held deep below. And beneath that, the faintest echo, the slow rise of a bell winding up to speak again. She stood quickly, heart hammering, and turned to find June at the edge of the grove, barefoot, pale, hair tangled. She looked like a child drawn in chalk. I didn't mean to hear it, June said, but it talks loud when you sleep. Clara walked toward her, but June took a step back. It said the bell isn't gone. It was never metal. It was just dressed that way. Clara knelt. Who told you that? June pointed to the soil. It did, underneath. It's not ringing to call the children. It's ringing because the children are inside it. Her voice cracked on the last word. Clara pulled her close, but June's skin felt too cold, too quiet. That night, they didn't light candles. They didn't pray. Clara wrapped June in every piece of clothing stitched with red thread. Then she sat by the door, shotgun across her lap, eyes fixed on the darkness. The bell rang at midnight, one deep, drawn-out toll that made the window panes hum. Then a second, then a third. June stirred in her sleep, mouth twitching, eyes fluttering, like something behind them wanted out. And then a fourth toll. The sound did not echo. It sank, like it had dropped into the house itself. Clara rose slowly. From the chimney came a thin trail of ash, though no fire burned. In it, the shape of a face, long, veiled, patient. Clara did not scream. She only whispered one thing to the empty air. You're not a bell. From the hallway came June's voice, not her own. No, I'm a door. He arrived just after the fifth toll, walking up the road with a lantern that didn't flicker and boots that didn't leave prints in the dust. No one recognized him, yet everyone said he looked familiar. Like a face from a dream, you forget the moment you wake. He called himself Penrose, though he offered no last name, and claimed to be a historian tracing the vanished villages of the South. Said Gracemire wasn't on any map anymore, which was strange, considering he'd found his way there just fine. Clara met him outside the old chapel ruins, where the stones still smoked from nothing. He unfolded a map across a flat headstone, the parchment yellowed, soft at the edges, and drawn with a hand too precise to be entirely human. This is what Gracemire looked like before the fire, he said. But these buildings, he pointed to 6 shaded rectangles, don't exist anymore. They've been wiped out, not just physically, but from memory. No records, no foundations, not even whispers. Yet here they are. Clara leaned in. One of the shaded buildings was marked with a small black circle. What's that? She asked. That, Penrose said, tapping the mark with one gloved finger, was the original bell house, not the church bell, the first one. Before your town ever had a steeple. Clara frowned. We were told the church built the bell tower. You were told wrong, he said. The tower was built around it, like dressing a wound with stone. June stood behind her, quiet, holding the box of baby teeth like a prayer. Penrose looked at her for a long moment, and his expression shifted. Not pity, not fear, recognition. She's heard it, he said. Hasn't she? Clara nodded. She speaks names in her sleep, names I haven't heard in decades. The bell doesn't call by voice, Penrose said. It calls by memory. Children remember what adults are made to forget. That's how it feeds. Clara glanced at the map again. The terrain around Gracemire seemed wrong. The river curved the opposite way. A building stood where her garden should be. A second road led to a place marked only as return. This isn't our town, she said. Not yet, he answered. But if the bell keeps ringing, it will be again. The map isn't what was. It's what the bell remembers. Clara's breath caught. And what happens when it remembers too much? Penrose folded the map slowly, eyes grave. Then it wakes up. That night, June drew a new picture. A bell split down the middle, like a cracked skull. Inside, rows of children sitting in pews, hands folded, all facing forward. At the pulpit stood the widow, her veil lifted, revealing a mouth that stretched from ear to ear. In the front row sat Elias, Ruth Ann, and a boy Clara had never seen before. Underneath, in June's careful hand, were 3 words. We were sermons. It started with the mirror in the attic. Clara hadn't looked into it since her husband died, not out of superstition, but because the glass had always shown too much. It had belonged to her grandmother, framed in black walnut, and angled just enough to catch the hallway behind you. That night, while June slept curled into herself like a comma, Clara climbed the stairs with a lantern and peeled back the sheet. The glass was clean, too clean. Not a trace of dust, though the rest of the attic was thick with it. For a long moment, it reflected only her face, tired, lined, eyes rimmed in shadow. But then, in the space where the hallway should have stretched behind her, a figure appeared. Small, still, a child, not June. Clara didn't turn. She watched the child through the glass. It stood with its hands folded, head slightly bowed, like waiting to be called on in school. Then another joined it, and another. Soon there were 6, all children, all silent. Their faces weren't quite wrong, but not quite right either. Eyes too still, mouths too patient. They stood in rows behind her reflection, each one holding something: shoes, teeth, paper bells. Clara turned quickly. Nothing, only dust and wooden beams. But when she looked back, the mirror was full of them again. This time, she noticed June among them. Not present-day June, but younger, maybe 6 years old, wearing a dress Clara hadn't seen in years, the one with the faded tulips. She was holding a chalk X in her palm. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Clara reached toward the glass. It felt warm. The reflection rippled like water disturbed by a breath. The children all turned their heads toward her in unison. Their mouths opened. No sound. But she heard it anyway. The bell, not ringing, but breathing like wind dragging across bone. Clara yanked the sheet back over the mirror and stumbled down the stairs. When she returned to June's room, the girl was no longer asleep. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounding herself with open books and pages torn from hymnals. Each page had a drawing. Bells split open like fruit, staircases descending into roots, children hanging upside down from trees with no leaves. June looked up, calm as candlelight. "They said you saw us," she whispered. "In the mirror." Clara knelt beside her. "Who are they, baby?" June pointed toward the ceiling. "The ones who never left. They say we were reflections first. Now we're memory." Clara pulled her close. Her heartbeat was slow, too even. "You're still mine," she said, voice breaking. "You're still here." June leaned her head on Clara's shoulder. "For now," she said. "But when the bell tolls again, I won't be in the mirror anymore." Outside, wind stirred the trees. Inside the attic, beneath the sheet, the mirror breathed. The grave was too shallow. Clara knew it the moment her boots sank into the soft earth behind the chapel, in the grove where nothing grew quite right. The ground there breathed wrong, spongy in some places, too still in others. Penrose had pointed it out earlier that day, unfolding his map and drawing a circle around a patch marked only with the word hollow. "It's not just a name," he'd said. "It's a warning." Now, with the sky bruising overhead and June asleep in the wagon nearby, Clara began to dig. Her hands worked fast, fevered, tearing through roots and bone-colored rocks. The scent that rose was not rot. Not exactly. It was older, more metallic, like wet iron. After only a foot, her fingers scraped something smooth. Wood, blackened, warped. A box, too small for a coffin, but too large for what it held. She lifted the lid and nearly dropped it. Inside lay a bell, not full-sized, not ceremonial. A small thing, maybe the length of a forearm, but it was wrong. It had no clapper. Its mouth was lined with teeth, human teeth set like a second row, grinning from within. The surface shimmered with symbols she couldn't read, but somehow understood. Call, gather, bind. Nestled in the velvet lining beside it was a child's quilt, stitched through with red thread and worn smooth with age. The same pattern her mother used, the same one June now slept under. Clara's hands shook. She reached to close the box, but the bell trembled. Not from her touch, from within. Then it exhaled, a low, breathless note, soft as sorrow. Behind her, the wind stilled. No insects, no birds, only the quiet and the bell's invisible hum, rippling outward. Clara backed away slowly, leaving the box open. By the time she returned to the wagon, June was already sitting upright, eyes wide, expression blank. I felt it, she said. The hollow one. It remembers. Remembers what? Clara asked, voice thin. Where it used to hang, June whispered. And who used to listen. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The bell's hum followed her home, not in her ears, but in the walls, the floor, the spaces between her bones. She heard children walking across the roof, feet too soft to be real. She saw handprints on the windows on the inside. She clutched June to her chest and whispered promises she couldn't keep. Just before dawn, she opened the quilt and found something new tucked inside. A single tooth, warm to the touch, and a note written in crooked red stitches along the edge. Bring it back. When she looked up, June was staring at the ceiling. It's almost full, she murmured. Clara followed her gaze. Above them, the roof groaned once. Then the sound of a bell not rung, but scraped, dragged through the house like a knife pulled slow through stone. Clara's mother had always said the dead leave behind more than bones. Some leave their voice, some leave their scent, and some, the worst kind, leave memory that doesn't know how to rot. That morning, Clara opened the old hope chest at the foot of her bed, the one her mother had warned her never to touch unless the bell came back. The hinges groaned. Inside were relics of a childhood Clara barely remembered. A baby bonnet, a lock of hair tied with ribbon, a half-burnt doll. And beneath them, wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief, a letter. The handwriting was her mother's, shaky but deliberate. If the bell ever rings again, you must not listen past the third chime. I've stitched what I could into your thread, but it won't be enough if she sings. Beneath the letter was a spool of crimson so deep it looked black in the light. Clara unspooled a length of it and stared at her hands, wondering what her mother had known, what she had feared, and whether love could stretch far enough to cover what was coming. Downstairs, June had already dressed herself, wearing the red-threaded dress, without being asked. Her eyes were dark this morning, rimmed with something that looked more like smoke than sleep. She's humming again, June said softly, holding a spoon she hadn't touched. The one under the bell. She's almost done remembering. Clara knelt beside her. We're going to leave, baby. We're going to pack a bag and go to Aunt Miriam's in Ash Creek. Far from here. June shook her head. You can leave the town, but the bell already knows your name. It carries us, not the other way around. Clara felt something cold slide through her veins. She stood, walked to the back door, and opened it. The fog was thicker now. It moved like fabric being pulled across the earth. In the distance, the chapel ruins stood dark and breathing. Penrose appeared from the mist without a sound. She's almost full, he said. What do you mean? Clara asked. The bell. It remembers in pieces. Names, faces, sounds. But when it finally recalls the last name, it will toll one final time, and that toll won't take someone. It will bring something. Clara swallowed hard. Can we stop it? Penrose didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was faded, but clear enough. A group of children standing in front of the original bell house, smiling wide. At the center was Clara, younger, holding hands with a boy she didn't recognize. Underneath, in small black ink, Gracemire Schoolhouse, spring term 1928. Clara stared, her breath caught. That can't be right. Penrose looked at her. The bell doesn't move forward, Clara. It turns time into a circle. And some of us have been here before. We just forgot. From the chapel ruins, the wind rose, and in it, the faintest sound of a girl humming from the grave. Clara didn't speak the rest of the day. She packed without thinking. Blankets, food, the red-threaded dresses, June's drawings, the bell box still wrapped in oilcloth. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The ticking of the wall clock scraped her nerves like a knife on bone. June followed her without asking questions, her eyes too calm, her silence too knowing. By dusk, they were ready. Clara led June down the back road, past the chapel, past the groaning trees, toward the edge of the map Penrose had shown. But the fog didn't lift. It thickened. No matter which path they took, they always ended up facing the Bell's Hill. The ground curved wrong. The trees doubled back. Even the wind circled. She's pulling, June said finally, sitting on a stone to catch her breath. She doesn't want us to go. She's making the bell louder. And Clara heard it then, not the toll, but the rattle, the clapper. Somewhere, nearby, metal scraping against itself, not struck, but stirred. She turned and saw it, June's mouth twitching, her lips parted, and she coughed, hard, once, twice, then spat something into her hand. Clara rushed to her side. In June's palm lay a piece of rusted iron, curved and pitted. A bell's clapper, warm, wet. Clara reached for it, but June closed her fist. It was in me, she whispered. Growing. Clara stood and looked toward the hill, where the bell tower had once been. Now, it was just bones of stone and smoke, but she knew what lay beneath. They walked in silence. The town behind them did not follow. No one came to help. No one would. The bell had claimed them long ago. At the chapel ruins, Clara dropped to her knees and began to dig. Not deep, just enough to expose the pit where the original bell had been buried. The soil smelled like breath. June stood beside her, humming low. The same tune from the mirror, the same tune from the drawings. Clara pulled free the oilcloth-wrapped bell from her bag and placed it in the hollow. The ground throbbed, not shook, throbbed, like a heartbeat, like something beneath was waking. Then the clapper in June's hand twitched. It moved, not from her fingers, but toward the bell, drawn like iron to blood. June dropped it. It rolled into the pit and struck the bell's mouth. A sound burst from the earth high, sharp, and wrong. The trees around them bowed inward. The sky cracked without lightning. And from every window in Gracemire, a child's face appeared, staring outward, mouths wide but silent. Clara clutched June. It's waking, she breathed. But June shook her head. No, that was its first breath. Behind them, a voice whispered from the soil, an old voice, layered with hundreds of smaller ones. One more child, one more toll, one more door. The bell pulsed again, and the clapper rang once, without being touched. They found him waiting at the edge of the graveyard, seated on the crumbled steps of the old schoolhouse that hadn't held a lesson in over 20 years. His coat was patched with ash, his eyes sunk deep, and in his lap sat a leather case, stamped with a faded emblem, an anvil crowned by flames. Penrose, the bellmaker's grandson, or so he claimed. No one knew his family, yet he spoke of the bell as if it had once slept beside him. Clara approached slowly, June at her side, red thread looped tight around both their wrists. Penrose stood when he saw them, opened the case, and drew out a journal bound in copper and soot. My grandfather forged the shell, he said, but he didn't make the voice. That was already inside it. What do you mean? Clara asked. He handed her the journal. The bell was never silent, even before the metal was poured. It was found in the marshes near a church that sank in the flood. No one knows how deep it goes. They tried to seal it, but it rang from the mud. That's when they decided to dress it, wrap it in iron, give it a mouth people could recognize. Clara flipped through the pages. Sketches filled every one, diagrams of the bell's shape, not round, but ribbed like a spine, not cast, but grown. In the margins, notes scribbled in haste. It breathes when left alone. The red thread slows the sound. Do not ring it. Do not ring it. The church in Gracemire wasn't built to praise it. Penrose continued. It was built to cover it. Like throwing a quilt over a fevered child and hoping it forgets its own heat. June stepped forward. Why, children? Penrose looked down at her, and for the first time, his voice faltered. Because they remember. The bell feeds on memory, on the unfiltered kind that comes before shame and reason. The younger the mind, the clearer the echo. So it eats? Clara asked. Not flesh, he said. Presence. It hollows them, leaves just enough to walk back home. But what returns is never full. Clara felt the blood leave her fingers. Then how do we stop it? Penrose shook his head. You don't stop the bell. You offer it something it can't echo, a memory it can't reflect. Something unfinished. June turned to her mother. You said I was born wrong. Clara froze. No. I said the midwife left too early, that your cry didn't come at first. Exactly, June whispered. I was never fully called here. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the final drawing herself, standing at the base of the bell, mouth open, hands raised, but no sound drawn from her throat, just red thread unraveling from her chest. Clara took the drawing, her hands trembling. Penrose nodded once. If she goes in, the bell might sleep again, but only if she chooses. June looked at her mother, eyes wide, steady. I want the echo to end with me. From the earth, the bell hummed once soft, waiting. They buried the bell once, and it came back. They rang it for prayer, and it took children instead. Now it pulsed beneath the soil, like a second heartbeat, deeper than breath, louder than silence. Clara stood at the edge of the hollow, with June's small hand tucked in hers. Though the girl felt far away, now lighter somehow, like she'd begun to untether from the world one thread at a time. The old chapel ruins loomed behind them, but the true altar lay below, where roots had curled around stone and ash had sealed old sins. Penrose waited nearby, his coat damp with fog, the journal clutched tight to his chest. She doesn't have to do this, Clara whispered. There has to be another way. There is always another way, he replied, but not without more names, more echoes. June stepped forward. She wore the red-threaded dress and nothing else. No shoes, no ribbons. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. Clara knelt, her voice shaking. Tell me what you see when you close your eyes. The bell, June said, but not like before. It's cracked. It's waiting to be filled. I think I was meant to be its last word. Clara fought the sob rising in her throat. You are my child. You are not a word. You are not a sacrifice. June tilted her head, her smile soft and unbearably old. Then remember me that way, not as something lost, but as something that ended the ringing. She stepped into the hollow. The earth did not resist. It opened like a door that had never truly closed. As she descended, the air changed. Birds rose from the trees in a sudden gust, their wings sharp against the sky. Penrose pulled Clara back, held her as the ground groaned low, like something old stretching its limbs after a long sleep. And then came the toll, not from above, not even from below, but from within every stone in Gracemire. It rolled through the bones of the town, shattering windows, cracking the schoolhouse wall, silencing even the dogs. In the moment after, nothing moved, no wind, no leaves, no time. And then, rising slow as breath, came a second toll higher, thinner, wrong. Clara clutched her chest. It was not the bell. It was June, singing, but not with her voice, with the voice of every child the bell had taken. Their names poured out in notes, syllables braided with sorrow and thread. The air shimmered, the ground trembled, and then it stopped. Just stopped. The fog lifted, the soil stilled. No toll followed, no hum. The silence was not empty, it was clean. Clara fell to her knees at the hollow's edge, calling her daughter's name. No answer. Only the red thread rising through the earth, tangled around a single lock of hair, and beneath it, the drawing June had made. The bell was gone. In its place, a cradle, empty but warm. The bell was never seen again. No stone remained where the hollow once opened, no scorch in the soil, no mark in the grass. By morning, the earth had closed itself over, like a wound that refused to scar. But the town knew, even those who claimed not to hear the tolls, even those who looked away when the chalk marks appeared, even they felt it that something had ended, but something else had begun. Gracemire did not speak of the bell after that day, not because they forgot, but because forgetting was safer. Clara returned home with June's thread wrapped around her wrist, the only piece left of the child who had once drawn bells and sang in her sleep. She placed it in the hope chest, beside the letter from her mother and the teeth box June once held. Then she sealed the lid with red wax. Penrose left that night, taking the copper-bound journal with him. The bell's memory is folded for now, he told Clara, as he stood at the edge of town. hat low, eyes darker than dusk. But if someone digs too deep, remembers too loud, it may echo again. Let it, Clara said. It'll find no name left in this town. He tipped his head and disappeared down the road that never stayed straight. Days passed, then weeks. The air changed. The fog came less often. The woods grew quieter, but not in the old way. Not in dread, just rest. One morning, Clara found a row of tiny handprints on the front porch. No mud, no paint, just warmth, as though small palms had pressed there in the early dawn and left their heat behind. That evening, she opened the attic and uncovered the mirror. The sheet had yellowed, stiff with dust. She hesitated, then pulled it away. Her reflection stared back, tired, lined, but whole. Behind her, no children, no bell, just her. Clara almost turned to leave, but then, in the far corner of the glass, a flicker, a movement. She looked again. There, at the edge of the reflection, a cradle, rocking, empty, yes, but still warm. Clara reached out, touched the glass. It was no longer cold. It pulsed beneath her fingers, like something alive, or remembering. A single note, soft as breath, rose through the floorboards. Not metal, not grief. Just a lullaby. She stepped back and let the mirror be. That night, the wind passed through the trees without knocking. No toll, no knock, no name. But Clara still left the porch light on, just in case the echo ever wandered home, not as a bell but as a girl with thread in her dress and a hum in her throat, looking for the mother who once told her that love, even buried, still knows how to ring. They came quietly in the weeks after the families of the taken, men and women with hollow eyes and old photographs tucked into their coat linings, names written in faded ink on the backs of brittle portraits. They didn't ask questions. They simply stood at the edge of the chapel ruins, hats in hand, lips moving without sound. Some brought shoes. Some brought teeth. One left a braid tied with thread and buried it beneath the ash tree that never bloomed. Clara watched from her porch, the red thread still wrapped around her wrist, now knotted tight. She didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. Grief recognizes itself without words. What surprised her most was how many remembered June children she had once played with in school, elders who swore they'd seen her drawing strange things in the dirt long before the first new toll. They remembered the girl who never cried when the bell rang, only listened, like she already knew what it was saying. One night, as the moon hung too low and the sky glowed faintly copper, Clara heard the knock again, not on the door, but on the mirror. She climbed the attic stairs slowly, holding her breath. The glass no longer showed her reflection. It showed a room that did not exist, candlelit, with rows of pews made of roots and bones. At the front, a cradle, still, empty, but swaying. The knock came again, not loud, but steady. Clara placed her hand against the glass. On the other side, June stood barefoot in her red-threaded dress, mouth closed, eyes calm. Not a ghost, not a dream. A memory returning to itself. Clara didn't cry. She only nodded. June pressed her palm to the other side. The glass warmed. Then the mirror cleared. Only Clara remained. In the days that followed, the bell tower's last stone crumbled into moss. The air grew softer, the fog thinner, and children, new ones, unburdened by the names that once rang through the soil, began to play again near the trees, their laughter echoing like a new kind of toll. Clara planted forget-me-nots where the hollow had been. They bloomed fast, unnaturally fast, spilling over the soil like blue fire, and every morning, before the sun rose, she left a small dish of water and a button at the edge of her porch, just in case. On the 21st night, she heard June's voice again, no bell, no toll, just a hum. It came from beneath the floorboards, soft and clean. Clara knelt, placed her ear to the wood. The hum grew louder, not mourning, not calling, just music. A lullaby made from silence and thread, and names once lost, now remembered. She whispered, "You're home," and the hum answered. The fog returned on the 22nd day, not heavy, not choking, just enough to blur the edges of things. It crept low across the ground, wrapping fences and shoes and porch railings in soft gray. Clara stood barefoot in her garden, red thread still bound around her wrist, now fraying at the knot. The flowers she'd planted bloomed in strange colors, now pale blues that shimmered like old mirrors, deep reds that bled at the tips. No one else in town seemed to notice. Or if they did, they chose not to speak. That was the new way of Gracemire, to notice in silence, to mourn without moving. She walked past the chapel ruins again, as she always did. The stones had settled. No trace of the bell remained, not even a dent in the earth. But Clara felt it still beneath her feet, in the pit of her belly, in the place where a mother's knowing sits. It wasn't sleeping, it was listening. That night, she heard the sound again. Not a toll, not a hum, a voice, small, clear, just outside her window. "Mama." Clara didn't flinch. She rose, opened the curtain, and looked out. No child stood there, no figure in red thread or lace, just a bundle, small and neat, resting on the porch. She opened the door slowly, fog curled around her ankles. The bundle was wrapped in quilt scraps, stitched with patterns. Clara didn't recognize symbols, knots, spirals like snail shells. Inside, she found a bonnet, white, unworn, and beneath it, a single red shoe, June's, but not dirty, not aged, new, as if time had looped back and begun again. She stepped out into the fog, holding the shoe in one hand, the bonnet in the other. "Is this what you want me to remember?" she whispered. The fog did not answer. But somewhere deep in the trees, a breeze passed through the branches with a low, pulsing rhythm, like a heartbeat slowed to near stillness. Like a bell breathing in, Clara returned inside, placed the shoe on the mantel, laid the bonnet across her lap, and began to hum the tune June once sang in her sleep. As she did, the walls seemed to settle, the wind quieted, even the floorboards stopped their aching creak. At midnight, the mirror upstairs shivered once. Clara didn't go to it. She no longer needed to look. The echo was fading now. Not forgotten, just full. The bell had its final name, and she had hers, Mother, not to a child who vanished, but to a girl who chose silence over song, thread over steel, memory over echo. Outside, the fog curled back into the trees, and far away, where no roads led and no maps reached, a bell sat quiet in the earth, its mouth sealed shut, cradled in roots, and humming in its sleep. On the 23rd night, the silence shifted. It was not broken, just bent slightly, like something leaning in to listen. Clara woke before dawn, her heart already pounding. The room was still. June's red-threaded dress hung where it always had, beside the window that never latched. The glass fogged from the inside. In the hallway, the old floor groaned once not under weight, but memory. She stepped out barefoot, lantern in hand, flame low and flickering. As she passed the attic door, she paused. The mirror had gone quiet for weeks. No breath, no fog, no flicker. But tonight, she felt its pull again. She opened it slowly. The glass was dark. Then light shifted, and a scene emerged. Not the chapel, not the hollow. A bedroom. Hers. But inside, June sat at the foot of the bed, swinging her legs gently. She looked older now, not in years, but in understanding, like she had lived through something the body never caught up to. Clara stepped closer. June didn't speak. She just raised her hand and pointed to the far corner of the reflected room. There, the cradle, rocking again. This time, not empty. Inside lay something swaddled in red thread and humming faintly. Clara placed her hand on the mirror. It pulsed warm once, then faded. When she blinked, the room was just a mirror again. No child, no cradle, no June. That morning, Clara walked the entire town before the sun was fully up. She traced the border of where the bell once breathed. The soil was calm. No footprints, no threads, no chalk. She passed the homes that had once been marked, Clay's, Tillman's, her own, and paused at each. There were no X's above the doors now, no shoes on porches, just wind and dust and memory. Near the schoolhouse ruins, she saw Penrose's old map nailed to the side of the well, weather-worn and curling at the edges. Someone had circled the word return in charcoal, then scratched it out. Beneath it, in handwriting she didn't recognize, one final message had been scrawled. She remembered us. That was enough. Clara folded the paper, pressed it into her coat pocket, and walked home. That night, she sat alone at the kitchen table and lit one final candle. Around it, she placed every object she had saved: the toothbox, the red spool, the broken clapper, the bonnet, the drawing of the cradle. She did not cry, she did not pray, she simply hummed. The tune had no name, no beginning, no end. It was not a song, not really. It was a sound passed down through soil and silence. And when she stopped, the air did not echo. It rested. For the first time since the bell had rung, nothing answered. No toll, no knock, no hum, just quiet. And within it, peace. Clara smiled. She closed her eyes. And somewhere deep beneath Gracemire, the bell dreamed not of children, not of names, but of silence, finally full. Comment the name of your town's oldest church. And if you want more stories that ring long after silence, like and subscribe to The Black Chapter.